The 8th of December, 1941. North Pacific gray deck, cold wind. Saito counts torque clicks one per breath, and a stray factory siren bleeds through the radio until the decisive battle creed buckles. The 8th of December, 1941. Pearl Harbor, a column of smoke and cranes already moving while dock pumps restart. Shore guns cough in fast beats as that same siren hardens into a punch press cadence, and the clock seems to change hands. Tools speak first. A wrench finds the flats and clicks in tens. Safety wire twists true and bites the glove at each tie-off. Solvent heat rides the air above engine cowlings. Lacquer catches a faint scorch where a panel rubbed. Saito works by cadence breathe set pull. Breathe set pull. He runs fingertips along a safety wire pigtail to feel the clean barb, not trusting a glance. Gauges hold their marks. Needle sweep on manifold pressure returns to origin without chatter. Nothing moves faster than the count of clicks. Silence drops like a lid, and he notices it because the deck crew notices it, because men trained to listen for trouble always feel the dent in sound before they can name it. Then a distant wail climbs out of the radio hash and refuses to fade. It does not belong to a ship. It does not belong to the sea. It resolves into metal, striking metal with a patient pause between blows, a press line somewhere ashore, turning steel into schedule. He does not look up. He tightens the last fastener and marks the cowling seam with a paint stick to prove proof. A carrier wind blows hard across the bow and leaves salt on the teeth. He tests an aileron throw and lets the hinge chatter under his palm. The pilot watches him the way pilots do when they want the deck to move faster but will not say it. He nods once. The nod says launch and recover, keep the loop unbroken. Saito widens his eyes to clear the grit and narrows them again onto the instrument glass. The count goes on. The breath holds at 3. The heart keeps time he does not admit he is hearing. He thinks the creed in plain words, a perfect tool in perfect hands, shapes the fight. He believes it enough to stand inside its echo and let the echo be comfort. He also watches smoke over the southern horizon and sees cranes angling their booms like metronomes. Sparks flicker and fall in steady arcs that look like numbers made visible. A truck arrives, empties, swings, wide returns. Another truck takes its place, without a voice calling it. He feels the loop form and settle. A voice scratches across a coastal set, flat and busy, not meant for him, and not caring if he hears. Pump restarted berth, dry by 1400, next hull in. No pride in it, no boast, only a list of things and times. The press cadence keeps beating behind the words. A second voice answers with a load count and a distance in yards to the next lift. Saito wipes solvent from a knuckle and finds the skin raw where wire bit. He watches a line crew pull a chalk and run the wheel clear. He feels his oath sit inside his chest like a tool in a pocket, no airframe cold for lack of readiness. A plane returns with holes where a calculation said there would be none, and the crew climbs out fast and whole. He hears the pilot describe fire like weather, short and heavy there and gone, and he knows the arithmetic is different on a pier, where steel goes up on a clock. The wrench feels heavier in his hand, not because of metal, but because of minutes. He looks at the torpedo again, at fins tuned for shallow water, and understands that a proof of mastery can be the slowest thing on a day measured by cranes. He tastes salt and hot solvent, and the breath he holds for count 3 lasts a little longer than it should. The siren that is not a siren keeps time over the radio. The smoke column does not thin. Trucks keep their loop. He tightens one more fastener, marks one more seam, and sees the error arrive without drama. The other side has captured time. Takeda runs a finger along the torpedo fin and snorts that the enemy flies crude, Grumman, iron, and rides ships stitched with Liberty welds that would shame a student shop. He means it as comfort. He means it as proof that craft still rules outcomes. Saito lets the line hang in the air and watches what the day is doing to the line. Labor sits on the skin like a second varnish. A perfect seam takes time. The tool marks are small signatures that say a man was here and cared. Across the water, the welds look like cords thrown and fused wherever the plate needed holding. They offend the eye trained to smooth. They offend the hand trained to pass over metal and feel nothing but continuity. Then the crane lifts again without waiting for the critique to finish, and the offense turns into a schedule. The figures do not arrive as a chalkboard. They arrive as hoists per hour counted by the unconscious drum of a pulse. Boom down hook on plate up arc flare cooling hiss next. A berth dries in minutes that used to belong to pumps warming and valves settling. Turn around at the pier shrinks until it fits inside a single cigarette that nobody finishes. Civilian presses stamp shapes the manuals never pictured, and the shapes still fit because the dock foreman ordered the design to make room for shortcuts. A factory siren that bled through the net in the morning returns and refuses to leave. It stretches into the metal press cadence, and the cadence folds itself into the wrist bones until every motion on deck tries to match it. Saito calibrates his hand to the wrench and loses a half step when the off-schedule whale becomes the steady press line again. The tool slips once. A brush of sweat runs off the heel of his palm and leaves a crescent on the cowling. He sets and pulls and feels his pulse rise with each number that does not appear on a dial. Labor hours per hull are not on his gauge, yet they push his breath shorter. Hoists per hour are not on his gauge, yet they tilt his shoulders towards speed. Minutes per berth are not on his gauge, yet they reset the urgency in his knuckles. The split grows in silence at first. A doctrine says perfection yields decisive advantage, and a deck officer repeats it because repetition makes belief. The field says otherwise, without speeches. A gun mount that looked rough yesterday cycles smooth today because a replacement part arrived tied with twine and did not require a perfect fit, only a good one and a hammer. A pump that was never meant to run salt in that configuration runs salt anyway because a machinist opened a box, drilled 2 holes, and made his own gasket of gasket paper and thick grease. The result is ugly. The result is on time. He remembers the inspection phrases like catechism, flush rivets, mirror polish at the fairing, seam lines invisible to fingertip. Each phrase promised a margin. Each phrase required hours. He sets a fastener and tastes hot solvent as it lifts from lacquer. The press cadence keeps thumping through the net and into the breath between his torques, and the catechism begins to sound like a prayer to a god that left the building when the roof came down. An ordnance truck loops again, and his eye finally understands what the loop means. Replacement beats repair when replacement lives inside a short road and a crane. Repair loses when repair requires artisans who sleep and eat and keep apprentices. The truck kills scarcity by showing up on time. The crane kills preciousness by picking up everything that can be moved. Perfection withers in the presence of a system that forgives imprecision with volume and design slack. Takeda keeps up his running gloss on enemies and their brutish equipment, and Saito hears pride as a kind of misfire. The proud splice the day into procedures and hold still for checklists that assume time belongs to them. The dock does not hold still. The dock flows. Civilian tooling that once stamped car fenders now turns out ammunition cases by the pallet. Jigs that never smelled salt now sit on planks above harbor water and do not care where they are, only that they cycle. A press smashes a bead into a plate, and the plate goes to a hull that is still dripping because drying can happen after fitting when the schedule says so. He inventories small betrayals of habit that look like sins and work like cures. A safety wire gets a twist that would fail a schoolroom, and the twist still holds because the sortie needs a minute, not a lecture. A panel line gets a paint mark that is not the regulation line weight, and the mark still tells the next hand where to check. The count of clicks shifts from devotional to transactional. It exists to make the airplane leave the deck, not to perfect the airplane in a way only another mechanic would notice. The emotional weight lands in the body ahead of words. Pulse lifts 4 beats when a crane grabs a plate on the first swing. Pulse lifts again when pumps take a berth from wet to workable before the second hand circles. A tremor starts in the ring finger when a load number comes over the air in a tone that has no triumph in it, only a rate. He steadies his wrist against the cowling, and the metal feels alive because the schedule is alive and the schedule is not his schedule. He tries to pull the failure back into the tactical frame, and the frame will not hold it. Aircraft can be steered, pilots can be trained, bomb runs can be computed. All of that assumes an opponent who must choose between skill and availability. The opponent refuses the choice. The opponent buys both by letting one be crude so the other can be constant. The insult about Grumman and Liberty welds decays into a compliment the moment the cranes do not stop, and the compliment tastes like defeat when the thing being praised is indifference to polish. A siren rises again, thin at first, then fuller, as if the distance had shortened. It folds into the press heartbeat that has been tapping at the edge of hearing since morning and locks in. The deck crew adapts their pace without asking. The line chiefs compress commands because the beat gives everyone the same cue. Saito feels his breath clip to the same count and hates that it helps. Numbers keep arriving as motion. A berth that used to turn in hours turns in less than one. A truck that used to wander on signal now runs a loop tight enough to draw with a compass. A gun team that used to wait for paperwork now calls its own resupply when the crate goes light. Civilian hands that never touched naval steel now touch it all day, because the lines between factory and harbor melted under heat and need. The clock deserts the artisan and joins the gang that can promise the next piece by the time the current one cools. Takeda says the word standards like a challenge, and Saito hears it like a relic. Standards do not win when the enemy writes a new one that measures minutes instead of microns. He can feel the conversion inside his own chest. The tool in his palm weighs the same and means something else. The oath in his pocket presses against his ribs and asks to be rewritten in the language of rate. The press cadence, thump thump pause thump, takes position as the day's metronome and does not yield even when the flight schedule calls for silence. It is not the sound of victory in a single stroke. It is the sound of a system that refuses to be impressed by a single stroke. He sets the wrench on the deck, wipes his hand, and sees that perfection has become a story he tells himself to feel necessary. The work that matters is the ugly work that arrives on time. The betrayal is not personal. It is structural. Kraft did not lie about beauty. Kraft lied about control. He tightens one more fastener and accepts what the pulse and the press have been saying since morning the clock has changed sides. They brief the pattern with crisp hands and straight wrists. Altitude bands stack clean. Bearings read like a metronome. The launch cycle runs without a stumble. Wings lift, wheels tuck, props bite the air in a uniform chew that makes the deck plates hum. Precision feels like a shelter, and for the first minutes it holds. The first pass is a needle-through cloth. Bomb racks, click release. Lights blink in proper sequence, and fall lines knit across the water with the accuracy that inspectors praise. A flak pocket opens late and to the wrong side. Tracers drift behind like afterthoughts. Radio calls stay dry and narrow. A gun run against a fuel yard draws a measured arc and plants rounds in a line you could lay a rule to. On the return, pilots report hits with the diction of men who did what they trained to do. Success arrives in shapes that match drawings. Saito keeps his loop tight. He sights each seam, drags a knuckle along safety wire, checks the contortion of a pigtail, watches the needle sweep, settle where math says it should. He calls for fuel and hears the line chief answer, while a hose couples with a sure click. The breath holds at 3 releases, holds again. The wrench fits and does not skip. The checklist steps move down the column, and the column shortens by the count of clicks. Then the second wave takes the pattern and learns a new rule. The air is still the air, but the ground has changed. Cranes that were background now move like punctuation. A pump that was idle now churns hard enough to send tremor into the deck of a pier. A gun that was slow now turns in a panting rhythm because a loader has learned to call for crates by weight instead of by form. Sparks fall with less drama and more pace. A truck that once wandered appears at the exact moment a crew's hands go empty. The dock becomes a machine that does not wait for manners. The press cadence rides the net again, faint and stubborn, the off-schedule wail, melted into metal strikes, with a pause between. It lays itself under the clipped voices of pilots and line chiefs, a second beat that refuses to be ignored. Saito tries to tune it out, and cannot. His hand starts a fine tremor that no one would see until the wrench slips a half flat and prints a shine on the fastener. He resets his grip and tells himself it is nothing. A breath he would have held for 3 counts stretches to 4. The third wave finds the target still there and somehow bigger. A fuel yard that should be dead uses its skeleton for leverage. A pier with a hole sails a patch plate into place and works anyway. A gun that was hit once returns with new hands, feeding it, and new boxes stacked within easy reach. Pilots describe an enemy that does not argue about damage. It routes around holes and keeps the loop intact. The precise maneuver continues to be precise and continues to matter less. Metric Y lengthens in the mind before it shows up in a log. Days per airframe to return to service swells by the thickness of a shim here, by the extra pull on a stubborn cowling there by the walk, to find a part that is no longer where it should be because the inventory clerk has taken his second duty at a radio. Saito feels Y lengthen in the weight of his shoulders as he leans over a wing root and tightens a hidden fastener. He knows it in the way his tongue dries when a pilot calls an early malfunction on a system that never failed in tests. A glare falls across the hangar lights as a plane returns with a fresh map of holes in places that used to be safe. The damage is not fatal. It is insulting. It says that barrels multiplied faster than angles could contain them, and that the guns learned new lead by seeing so much target. The crew climbs out hot and whole, and angry about the math, not the danger. The radio does not celebrate. It adds requests to the bottom of a list that does not end. Saito reopens a cowling he had closed 2 minutes earlier and feels the shape of defeat in the simple act of unsnapping a latch he had marked finished. The checklist box he had crossed needs a second line through it. The wrench finds the flats again. Sweat travels past his wrist to his palm and makes the knurling slick. The tool slips, catches, prints a second shine on the fastener like a scar beside a scar. He tightens anyway. He knows the torque by feel, and hates that he knows it this well. The rhythm outside refuses to slow. A crane lifts, a plate swings, an arc strikes, a truck loops. A gun breaths in rounds, and exhales tracers at a rate that teaches muscles to fire faster. The press cadence sets the pace for men who never worked under a press and now cannot avoid its beat. The shock sound folds into radio discipline, frays it, then hardens it into a new discipline aligned to throughput. The difference between skilled and sufficient shrinks until only rate remains. A pilot sketches a success on a kneeboard with a stub of pencil and gestures, without looking as if drawing the line can make the world stay that precise. He taxis to the mark. The mark moves. A signalman waves him forward sooner than either of them expects. Saito steps clear of the prop wash and takes the next airframe with a speed that feels like theft from his own standards. He sets and pulls, and a tremor runs down his ring finger like a fault line. He presses the wrist to metal to quiet it. The metal thumps with the press beat that lives miles away and is somehow here. On the fourth cycle, the precise tactic has nothing to push against because the target has become a system. The strike lands and draws blood. The system redirects flow. A pump starts that should not have parts yet. A berth dries that should not have crews yet. A rough weld holds that should not pass any inspection Saito respects. Discipline, beautifully executed, burns itself for seconds of effect and leaves the field to a machine that counts in minutes and hours and simply refuses to stop. He watches a gun crew on shore through a glass and sees them misfeed, once clear the jam by instinct and resume at a rate that makes his stomach tighten. He hears a loader's voice call numbers with no triumph, only cadence, 30 and 30 more, 30 more. He understands that the enemy has trained the clock, not the hand, and that the clock now trains the hand back. The first pass proved skill. Every pass after proves skill is not the deciding variable. A plane rolls up with a rattle in a panel he had signed as clean. He opens it with the speed of a man pulling a splinter and sees nothing wrong that a slower world would not allow him to solve for good. This world allows nothing slow. He swaps the panel, marks a new line, and eats the fact that he will likely see this panel again in 1 hour. Metric Y stretches another day in his mind, though the calendar shows none of it yet. He understands that calendars trail reality when the clock moves like this. The press cadence rises louder in his head as if the distance has shortened. He imagines the punch descending, the pause, the rise, the descent. He cannot keep his breathing independent of it. He stops trying and uses it. He hates that it helps. He hates that it increases his rate. Takeda starts to praise the geometry of the last run, and Saito waves him off with 2 fingers because geometry does not address a pier that behaves like a second factory. He hears in his own voice a thinness he does not allow. He tightens one more fastener and chooses a corner to cut that will not kill anyone and will buy 2 minutes for the next step. He counts this as a strategic act, not a sin. He knows why he is telling himself that. The planes keep coming, and each arrival brings either a small success that evaporates in the face of rising volume or a small failure that multiplies as fatigue enters the hands that never used to shake. The deck crew shortens sentences. The line chiefs trade nouns for verbs. Everything that can be made a loop becomes a loop. The precise maneuver repeats, and each repetition pays out less than the one before. By late light, the lesson stands in plain view. The trauma does not erupt. It accumulates. 1,000 correct motions purchase seconds. 1,000 crude motions purchase time. Saito feels the cost where emotion lives because the body is where clocks are kept. He steadies his wrist for the next torque and understands that discipline, beautifully strict, has become sacrifice offered to a god that no longer answers. The press beat answers instead. It says, proceed. It says, proceed again. It says, proceed until the precise movement admits that it serves a schedule it does not control. The siren that is not a siren blows the horizon flat and fills the net with a sheet of metal noise. It lands on the deck like weight. It forces speech into fragments. It turns breath into timed pieces. The press cadence underneath it swells until even the rivets in the catwalk seem to answer. Saito lifts his head, and the world pulls into two tracks, the tool in his hand and the sound that says his hand is late. A pilot wheels in, with a panel rattling like teeth in a jar. The plane should go forward in the cycle. The plane is going nowhere without parts that are still on a ship and not on this deck. The checklist stands open at a line that needs a part number, not a prayer. The siren climbs again and hammers into the press beat so hard the voice in his earphones breaks into grains. He tries for 3-count breathing and gets 2 ragged pulls and a hold that burns. He sees 3 damaged airframes with damage small enough to fix fast if the deck were a storehouse. They sit in a neat line, like promises he cannot keep. He sees 1 healthy airframe with everything in it the others need. He tastes metal in his mouth. He knows the oath sitting in his chest like a tool in a pocket that he touches when he needs to remember who he is. No airframe cold for lack of readiness. Not on his watch. The factory rhythm answers back with thump thump, pause thump, at a volume that changes how flocking birds move over the harbor. The press and the siren fuse into one command that does not care about phrases like principle and craft. He feels his heartbreak pattern. 84 beats per minute has been the serviceable ground. It leaps past 100 in a span so short he does not count it. Breath goes shallow. Vision sharpens at the edges and leaves the center too bright. Takeda calls geometry from the last run, as if geometry could plug a hole or stamp a housing, as if the angle of approach could become a bearing in a box by speaking it cleanly. Saito does not answer. He lifts a fastener and the knurling prints into his wet fingers, and the fastener slips and hits the deck. It pings like a small truth told by accident. Everyone near hears it. No one comments. The sound lands inside his chest, like a safed round that still weighs the hand. The oath says, protect the whole. The deck says, feed the many. He looks at the healthy airframe with the clarity of a man seeing a path across thin ice and knowing that the speed of the crossing will decide his survival. He raises his hand to the line chief and cuts the air with 2 downward slices. The gesture is new. The gesture means remove. The gesture means strip fast and label only what the next hands need to know. The gesture violates the sentence he has held as spine since he first wore the rank. Pull the pump, pull the panel, pull the feed. Move the harness, he says, and his voice sounds like it belongs to the press line. The chief repeats already in motion. Men swarm with purpose that does not wait on grief. A healthy machine becomes a table of parts. Hoses that belong together for a reason become separate intentions. Screws go to trays that do not match. A cowling that fit with a kiss of hand pressure lifts and parks against a bulkhead with a chalk mark that means nothing like respect. Heart rate spikes again, 110, 120, and a little more. He does not chase the number. He rides it like a wave that will crush him if he thinks about it too long. Breath shortens to a pattern he would fail a physical 4 on any calm day. The press cadence keeps time for his diaphragm and for hands on wrenches that have never seen a factory and now are factory in everything but name. Kobori shouts that the net is dirty with overtones. He has to shout because the tone makes words melt. Saito nods once, wipes his palm on his coverall and takes a housing into both hands as if it were a child, and then he passes it like a crate while his mind screams that this is wrong. Hino retrieves it and bolts it into a frame with speed that would draw a rebuke for cross-thread risk. The threads catch. The piece holds. The pilot watching says nothing and holds his own tongue behind his teeth to keep from saying anything about holiness and machines. The healthy machine surrenders a second part and a third. The 3 damaged airframes grow organs. The work looks like theft. It feels like triage. The sound says it is neither. It is rate. The siren vaults again so loud the decks groan, with the note then drops away into that steady sequence that is neither kind nor cruel. It is the sound of a city deciding to produce. A hand slips, a tool bites knuckle, blood wells. It falls in dots that mean nothing to metal. The man shakes his hand once and goes on. Saito watches and catalogues the small costs. He catalogues the purchased minutes, the way he would once have catalogued polish. He knows he will dream the layout of that healthy airframe as absence for weeks. He knows the three that rise will write themselves into logs as sorties. He knows which column matters. Takeda finally understands the order and goes quiet in a way that feels like prayer interrupted. He stares at the stripped fuselage as if a body were on a table. Saito almost tells him to look away and does not. Shame belongs in daylight on a day like this. Shame belongs here with the smell of hot solvent and skin, and the skipping beat in the chest that says the body knows what the mouth will not say out loud. A crane on the harbor lifts a plate at the precise moment they set a salvaged housing into place. The timings converge by accident or by law. The pause in the press cadence feels shorter. The breath he draws under it feels thinner. The housing seats. The bolts grab. A hand slaps the metal twice as if to seal it, and the slap leaves a print that looks like a signature and also like a smudge. He authorizes a start. The engine coughs, catches, holds. The needle finds its mark. The pilot signs with 2 fingers and taxis. 2 more machines follow the same path from near broken to good enough. Each success takes a sliver of him with it and leaves a number in return. Sorties per hour climb. Pride per unit falls. He keeps count, and does not let the count turn into a story. The stripped machine waits with its ribs, showing a quiet accusation that looks like honesty. The pulse steadies just below the top of the spike, and hovers there like a metronome set for sprint. Sweat turns salt in the corner of his mouth. He rolls his shoulders once to chase a cramp from the place where he carries stress, and finds there is no relief because the stress lives in the schedule, not in his muscles. He bends over the naked fuselage and writes a chalk line down its flank to keep track of what has been taken. The line is not straight. He does not correct it. The radio carries a flat voice counting loads, and another voice closing a berth that was a river 20 minutes ago and is now floor. The press beat takes the words and hammers them into one more instruction. Proceed. Proceed again. Proceed until the day is used up. He hates the beat and uses it anyway. He hates that using it feels like competence. He recognizes the moment when identity breaks because it does not feel like an explosion. It feels like a hinge, giving a quiet release of a weight he called purpose. The skill remains. The meaning attached to skill changes. The craft remains. The claim that craft decides does not survive this sound. He looks at the stripped airframe and does not promise to put it back together. He promises something else that would have sounded like betrayal this morning and sounds like truth now the rate will be kept. He picks up the dropped fastener from where it rolled against a rib and pockets it without thinking. A small relic. A reminder of the moment the hand betrayed the oath, so that the deck could keep faith with the loop. He stands breath still short, heart still high, and raises his arm for the next strip order. The word he does not say presses against his tongue anyway. Irrelevance. Not of men. Of the dream that one perfect thing done perfectly could slow a machine that counts by minutes and is already a day ahead. The deck quiets to a workable murmur. Men move in the practiced silence of crews who have burned away their chatter. Saito steps to the edge of the hangar, where light from the low sun turns metal into a book with raised letters. He sets the torpedo cradle brakes and draws the cart alongside a recovered patch plate that came off a U.S. hull that morning, still warm from the weld. The plate carries a seam as rough as a shoreline. The torpedo fin beside it looks like geometry polished into a promise. He holds them both in the same glance until the eye refuses to smooth one into the other. The fin catches light in a straight run from root to tip, with no wavering, every edge feathered by hand, every millimeter, a record of time spent to make drag surrender. The weld steps along the plate like a boot print. On wet sand, high, low, each bead a blow counted by the arm that laid it. One claims elegance, the other claims speed. Only one is multiplied today. He takes out a wristwatch that has never decided anything until this week. The second hand ticks with a confidence that has nothing to do with him. He looks down harbor where a gun crew stands knee-deep in its own stacking discipline, crates open in a half-moon around the mount jackets peeled motion efficient. He starts the watch on the first call. 30 in. He counts the lift, the seat, the feed, the slam, the throw. 30 more. The hand sweeps. 30 more. The mount breathes in a rhythm that trains its own muscles. The watch hand does not dawdle and does not rush. The loop writes itself into the dial. He rests fingers on the rivet line of the patch plate. The line is not perfectly straight. It does not need to be to hold. Heads stand proud enough to find with gloves. Heat still at the metal's skin tells him the job finished minutes ago and went straight to service. He imagines the layout board that did not exist for this fix, the inspection that did not stop it, the signature that came in the form of a crane hook moving on. He drags a fingertip over each head and feels the small difference between this and the math he learned to love. Takeda stops beside him and says nothing for a long breath. The torpedo fin seems to demand commentary. The seam refuses it. Saito waits for the old phrases to arrive, and they do not. The wristwatch ticks at his ear like a small press with a single tool. He times another reload loop, and another. The gun team misses once, corrects instantly, and loses no rate. The hand is halfway to the minute mark. He picks up a chalk stick and draws a thin line along the fin's trailing edge to mark a spot he would normally polish out for nothing more than pride. He feels foolish the instant the chalk writes. He wipes it with his thumb and leaves a smear that looks like a correction, and is not. He sets the chalk down and uses the thumb on the rivet seam instead, counting heads with skin and not with eyes, learning what acceptable means when the clock holds the gavel. A pilot from the last cycle joins them with the unsteady gait of a man whose inner ear is still landing. He rests forearms on the patched plate and squints toward the gun line. The crew below him calls numbers as if reciting parts of a road. 30 in, 30 more, 30 more. Saito lifts the watch and hears his own pulse line up with the tick without permission. He speaks and does not raise his voice. Throughput owns effect. The words come out like a diagram pinned on cork. Takeda turns as if the phrase were a hand on his shoulder. He looks from fin to seam and back and seems ready to build a counter-argument out of airfoil truths and fluid dynamics. The dock resolves behind his eyes. He nods once, very slightly, and lets the argument stay unbuilt. Saito makes the tally the way he would close a toolkit, slow enough not to miss a piece, fast enough not to leave the kit on the deck. Rate of fire becomes breaths bought and breaths taken. He plays the earlier passes in his head and translates their geometry into seconds of suppression that did not add up because barrels multiplied faster than angles could contain them. He adds the day's work on the deck, days per airframe, stretched when precision required repeats under fatigue. He adds the 3 machines lifted by parts from one, and puts the stripped fuselage on the other side of the line. The number is not elegant. The number is honest. He scratches a simple ledger on the back of a clipboard with a carpenter's pencil he keeps for marking seams. X on one column where the guns beat time into the air. Y on the other where airframes return to service or do not. Under X, he writes the count in rounds per minute, timed by the watch. Under Y, he writes the hours lost and gained by cannibalization, by rework, by slips under sweat, and by shortcuts that held. He drags a single line through both columns to join them, and does not draw a sum. He does not need one. The shape of the day sits in the way the line leans. The fin holds its beauty with the indifference of an object that believes in the old terms. The seam holds its purpose and dares anyone to measure it with a mirror. He looks at the fin one last time and sees not a lie but a misplacement, a truth moved to the wrong battlefield. He lays his palm on the seam and it warms his hand. He opens and closes the fingers and feels that the metal is not offended. A stray breeze turns the smoke column a shade paler. Trucks loop, cranes angle and reset. The press cadence, softer now, still taps at a low frequency that finds bone. The gun crew below calls another count, and the number lands clean inside the second-hand sweep. The watch feels heavier, as if a tool acquired mass once it became doctrine. He returns to the stripped airframe and chalks a list, not by part name, but by time saved, pump first, then harness, then panel. He catches his reflection in a dull piece of aluminum and does not look away. The reflection belongs to a man who tightened to a standard, and then to a schedule, and now to an equation, with 2 terms bound together by a line. He pockets the watch. He does not put it back on the wrist yet. He wants to feel the absence as proof of the change. He says nothing more, because doctrine-wearing work clothes has said enough. The seam, the fin, the tick, the count, the ledger, scratched on a board, no inspector will sign, each points to the same end. Waste is the heat left when skill fights a clock, and the clock does not slow. He lays the fin's protective cover and clips it down for storage that may never be needed. He taps the patch plate twice in a habit he did not have this morning. The sound is dull and correct. He raises his hand for the next assignment and carries the ledger in muscle and breath where it will not smudge. Morning doctrine promised that beauty in metal could force outcomes. Evening work proves that time does the forcing. The deck carries the proof in fingerprints and chalk, and the quiet fatigue of crews who learned a new grammar without a class. Saito stands between a stored fin and a patched plate, and lets the two speak at once until the argument resolves into rate. Acceptance arrives in the body before it reaches the tongue. Pulse no longer spikes at the press beat, it entrains to it. Breath no longer fights the count, it uses the count to pace hands. The oath that defined worth narrows and converts. Protect the whole becomes feed the loop. The loop has a name now that does not require philosophy to make it dignified. Sorties per day, hoists per hour, minutes per berth. The words are plain, and they rule the scene. He watches a gun crew swap boxes with a smoothness that looks like water finding grade. He measures the interval with the wristwatch and feels no betrayal in the act. The watch is not an accessory anymore. It is a sighting device. It shows him the place where effect is born, not in the precision of a single unit, but in the rhythm that turns many rough actions into a single continuous pressure. He names the truth without decoration. Resource per minute beats perfection per unit. The mind tries for a last refuge in geometry and loses it to flow. A finely calculated approach still matters, but only as a contribution to total rate. A beautifully tuned fin still saves drag, but only if it feeds a schedule that will launch again before the first story about beauty finishes its sentence. Craft keeps its dignity as craft and surrenders its claim on control. Control moved miles inland to cranes and presses and trucks and pallets and hands that do not perform miracles so much as they refuse to stop. He looks at the stripped machine and does not feel the earlier shame rise. It sits where it must to make three others live in the only way that counts tonight. He runs a hand along the chalk line he drew down its flank and feels at last no need to apologize to metal. The apology belongs to hours spent polishing where a clock would not notice. The debt has a unit now. Minutes saved. The payment has a method. Replace before repairing, if replacement caches faster. Redeploy before refining, if redeployment brings effect sooner. The horizon cools from orange to steel and leaves the harbor lights to count for sight. In the new light, the seam and the fin reduce to function. One will be multiplied by cranes, the other will be multiplied by stories. He knows which multiplication bends a battlefield. He pockets the watch and then takes it out again because the weight belongs in the hand that makes decisions. He times a final reload loop and says nothing. The number goes where numbers go when they become doctrine. Into muscle memory. Into orders that shorten without losing clarity. Into the unvoiced alignment of many separate crews who learn to hear the same beat. He writes the last line of the day in the only register that makes both pride and regret readable. It is not a flourish. It is a ratio. Resources divided by time. The quotient tells him what fear could not face at dawn. Availability is not a style. It is sovereignty over minutes. Sovereignty over minutes is sovereignty over outcomes. Mechanism B seized the clock. Doctrine A, lost to availability. The fused metric resources per minute decided the war.